This is Hal Wallace speaking from Shepperton Studios in England, where I made Becket with Richard Burton, and where we've been together again on Anne of the Thousand Days, a film on the scale of Becket, but on a broader emotional canvas, for this is basically a great love story. Richard Burton portrays Henry VIII, a king intrigued with one of the young women in his court, Anne Boleyn. As Anne Boleyn, a remarkable new talent emerges. Her name, Genevieve Bujold.
It's ticklish business any way you look at it. Come on, we'll stick together.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Ticklish Business, the podcast all about old Hollywood. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Kristen Lopez, joined as always by my intrepid co-host, Emily Edwards. Emily, how are you?
I'm peachy. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, because it's my birthday. It's my birthday episode. Yay! I am celebrating another rotation around the sun, and doing that means that I get to pick the movie. And as birthday episodes past have shown, I pick weird, esoteric, biased stuff that only I care about. This year, I'm going to top it because it's the 55th anniversary of one of my favorite movies, the movie that made me both love the Tudors and history and classic film and Genevieve Bujold. It's 1969's Anne of the Thousand Days. If you're saying, why are we going to talk about that movie? It's because it's my birthday, damn it. And that's what we're talking about. Go full Henry VIII for this episode. And to help us look at the Tudor landscape of cinema, I am joined by an expert in history, a woman who talks all about the amazing, rad, bad, dangerous women of the historical landscape, and has talked about a couple Tudors. It is Anne Foster of Vulgar History. Anne, how are you?
I'm good. I also want to mention I am Canadian, so in terms of Genevieve Bujold, I'm here as a Canadian to represent our queen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to realize she was not French. She is a Canuck.
French Canadian.
Yes, exactly. But I do love to, and we'll talk about this in a second, that the trailer for this movie calls her Genevieve. And I'm still not really 100% clear on the Genevieve of it all, but I'm going to call her by what most people call her, so we're using the snooty phrasing. Before we get into that, we'd like to remind everybody, if you haven't subscribed to the Ticklish Biz Patreon, you should do that. We do all sorts of additional podcasts, like double features, looking at remakes, based on a true podcast, looking at biopics and true crime, as well as But Have You Read? The series, spotlighting classic literary adaptations. We just finished our Don Johnson July, looking at Born Yesterday and The Long Hot Summer. Not the originals, the Don Johnson starring ones. And we had fun. There was laughter. There was tears. There's questions of how Don Johnson is still making movies today. So you should definitely check that out over at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. We also give out care packages of gifts, host exclusive interviews, and let you guest on an episode. It starts at just $1 a month. And don't forget, Emily and I are both authors. You can currently buy my book, But Have You Read the Book? And Emily's Viviana Valentine Girl Friday Mystery Series, wherever you buy your books. Plus, our Redbubble store has some fabulous art, all designed by Samantha Richardson and Terrence Hiltz, that you can slap onto a variety of items. It's also where you can find our popular Jean Kelly, Judy Garland, the Pirate Makoko mugs, as well as, apparently it's a popular one now, the Basil Rathbone I've Been Rathboned image, which a lot of people have actually slapped on t-shirts, because why not? I love this. So you can find out more and buy some stuff at ticklishbiz.redbubble.com. And if you're ever looking for an old episode of our archive of shows, it goes all the way back to episode 1. It's always free at ticklishbusiness.podbean.com. So that's all the preamble. Let's talk about 1969's Anne of the Thousand Days. This is the domestic drama of Henry VIII, played by Richard Burton, who is ready to dump his old wife, played by Irene Pappas as Catherine of Aragon, for his new hot young one, Anne Boleyn, played by Genevieve Bujold. But before that can happen, he's got to get his first marriage annulled, separate from the church, start a whole new religion. And meanwhile, Anne Boleyn does not like him at all. If you have watched The Tudors, or really any type of Tudor-centric story, you know who these people are. If you've read any books, you should be well-versed in this story. But, you know, if you already know that, great. But have you seen it with Richard Burton? The answer is no. I love this movie. This is a movie that I make everybody watch, and they all hate me for it afterwards. My mom knows as soon as she hears lute playing that there is Anne of the Thousand Days. She thinks this movie's incredibly boring, by the way. But I watched this in 6th grade. I had a teacher who was teaching us about the Tudors, which I don't even know if they teach that in grade school anymore.
In America? That's interesting.
Exactly. We
love
also
our Brits.
yeah, we did a whole section on European history. I remember we had to recreate and make our own like illuminated page. Like, you know how like in books of that time they made
like a manuscript at the beginning of a Disney movie.
Yeah, we did a lot of really weird stuff, which I'm sure now has all been cut due to like the lack of funding in our educational system. But I watched this in 6th grade with a bunch of other 6th graders. Every single one of them was bored except me. I was riveted to this film. I loved the costumes. I loved the mess. I loved the fact that Geneviève Bujold is hair goals in this movie. I loved everything. We had to write a report about what we watched and what was significant. I wrote 4 pages as a 6th grader. I typed that out, and it's stuck with me ever since. For a while, this movie was not easy to find on disc. And so when they finally released it on a double bill with 1971's Mary Queen of Scots, I bought it, and I cherish it to this day. It's got flaws. You know, Burton is Burton, but I had such fun with this. And I mean, you've talked a lot about the Tudors on your podcast. I know you and I have talking about this movie for a while. What's your background with this story? What did you think of the film?
Interestingly, as I mentioned, I am from Canada, and we did not study any of this in school, despite being a Commonwealth nation. So that's interesting. We studied mostly here the fur trade. So my background of this is that when I was a young girl, my family didn't travel much, but we did take a trip to the UK once. And I was mad. I wanted to go to Disney instead. But I love a gift shop. I've always loved a gift shop. And I picked up a book that was like Henry VIII and his 6 wives. Because I was like, who are these people? They kind of look like me, pale skin, red hair. And then I read that book and I was so fascinated. And every gift shop that we went to, I picked up another book about like Elizabeth I or Mary Queen of Scots. And then that, very similar to age to you, Kristen, I think around that grade 6 age. And I was just like, these are my girls. I will ride for these 6 wives. Like the fact that now there's 6 in musical and stuff, I'm just like, hell yeah. Like everyone's catching up to me and my intense feelings for the Tudors in general. And I am of a generation, an elder millennial, where video stores were a big part of my childhood and growing up. This is why I love your podcast. I'm so excited to be on here because I love classic Hollywood movies in general. So I was just like, this is my vibe. I like it's Tudors, it's classic Hollywood. Somehow I've never seen this before. But I do remember being a young person and I was just like so obsessed with the Tudors. I'm like, I want to watch all the movies about it. But all I knew to find was the like 1933 Lives of Henry VIII or something like that.
Yeah, the Corda film with Charles Laughton.
Yeah. So that was all that the video store had. So I don't know. Had I watched this movie, I would have been fully obsessed with it, I'm sure, because Geneviève Bujold is amazing. Her hair, the wigs, the costumes. I want to shout out, actually, before I forget, because costume designers are very important people who should not be neglected. Margaret First did the costuming, and it's Oscar nominated. I think Oscar winning. She also did The Lion in Winter. She did Beckett. She's like the on-call British history.
Go-to. Yeah.
1960. She did that Mary Queen of Scots as well, the 1971. Anyway, I came into this movie and first of all, I was like, oh, I hope I like it because I'm a bad liar. And I know that this is your birthday movie and it's special for you.
I mean, if you hated it, I would just be like, that's fine. I'm ride or die for it. So
it sounds like you're used to that, but no. So I started watching it and I was like, thank God I like this. Thank God this is good. I thought to myself for the first half of the movie. But we can talk more in depth about what happens later. And basically what happens later is that Geneviève is sidelined and it's just a lot of Richard Burton being like, how do I divorce her? Meh. Which is not what I was there for. Like I wanted to be, but what's Geneviève up to? What's she doing? What's her hair like? What outfits is she in? Like I loved the movie as long as she was there. And then when she was sidelined, I was just kind of like losing interest a little bit. But then she came back at the end strongly.
Exactly. Well, and I before we get too far into it, I want to talk about vulgar history for a second. I mean, you get asked a lot to do tutory things. I mean, the Tudors are kind of low-hanging fruit for history. For you, what have you learned about the Tudors, I guess, in talking about them for your show? Like, why do we still care about this messy ass royal family centuries later?
What I will say is, why do we care about this messy ass royal family when there's so many others equally, if not more
Yeah.
messy? And the reason why, my theory, is that in the Victorian era, Queen Victoria came on the scene, and she and her supporters wanted to be like, it's a lady queen, but like, don't worry, it's cool. Elizabeth was also a queen, and she was great. So people in the Victorian era, and this is like artwork, like so many of the famous paintings of the Tudors and stuff are from them. Like histories were written. Like the Victorians loved the Tudors, and then a lot of Victorian culture just carried on. And then they lived the Tudors, so then they told the stories, and then people started making movies in the early 1900s, and they're like, oh, the Tudors, we love the stories. And then people saw those movies, and then more people wrote biographies. So they've got their own ecosystem. It's like every generation has their own reason. Like now there's just My Lady Jane just came out. Like
Yeah.
the Tudors are perennial. They are every decade there's a new, people love it. So then they tell their kids about it, then they grow up and then they tell their kids about it. And it's just
I mean, the Stars Network is pretty much just Tudors related at this point. And I want to shout out a book by Susan Bordeaux, and the title of it,
The Creation of Anne Boleyn.
The Creation of Anne Boleyn. It's a great book that I wish I had thought of to write, but it charts the different iterations of Anne Boleyn in film. And we'll talk about that in a second, because Geneviève Bujold is often considered one of the best Anne Boleyns, next to maybe like Natalie Dormer and the Tudors, but she's very much representative of this late 1960s entering second wave feminism type of Anne Boleyn that I can't wait to deconstruct with you two. Emily, I was very afraid telling you we were going to watch this. I've made you go through it the last couple of months, watching stuff, whether it's International Month or watching this. I just need to know, I mean, how history centric are you? What's your interest in the Tudors, if any? What did you think about this movie?
I read literally nonfiction historical books like a dad. Like every night before I go to bed, that's what I read. And so now that I'm not doing my literature podcast anymore, so I don't have to suffer through like 500 pages of Victorian sadness every single night, I'm like, I get to read what I want. And apparently, like, I don't read World War II books like a dad. I read stuff that is like specifically around like this period. I'm a little more obsessed with like the Medicis and Italian stuff, but it crosses over, obviously. So I was really excited to watch this. I got to watch Richard Burton be all Burton-y, and he's just Burtoning around. And Geneviève is awesome. She's really great. I don't think it's historically accurate in really anything aside from the major plot beats. And there's like, I'm so glad you already brought up the second wave feminism, because it just like drips with it from the walls. But I enjoyed it. I really did. It's long. It is long. Girl,
it is 2.5 hours.
You are not allowed to assign me a movie that goes longer than 2.5 hours. But we also did a number of 3 hours in the last couple of weeks too. So, okay. Other than that, delightful. I mean, the costuming is phenomenal. And normally when I say that, that's like the cinematography was really good, or things like that, where you just like want to pay a compliment to something. But no, the costuming is amazing. It's actually really quite fantastic. Oh, it was like our Daisy Miller comment where we're like, oh, the cinematography is great.
I was going to say, is
really
costume
good.
Design it's beautifully shot and bare minimum best comment you can
exactly.
make? Yeah.
But no, delightful. I really enjoyed it.
Yes, score. Just wait. Emily's gonna make me watch some 3-hour Bulgarian film next time. I can't wait. I mean, to go back to where we were, like cinema wise, because I think people, when they watch this, it's so of the era. It's so of the era. It's how Wallace produced, how Wallace was kind of the king of costume dramas around this time. If you watch the trailer for this movie, which I did, how Wallace narrates the trailer. So that, I think, is immediately interesting. He's that old school Hollywood mogul where you just need to hear him talk and you get all of the authenticity and the legitimacy that you need. He's telling you that it's from his production company, so it's a mark of quality. But he had done Beckett, and by also around this time there had been The Lion in Winter and A Man for All Seasons. The 1960s into the 1970s were really hot for the Tudors. I'm not completely clear why.
He grew up, I read the same book as you, but it was talking a bit about this. He grew up learning about this in school. He loved them, and he was just like, I'm a Hollywood mogul. Great. Here's what we're going to do. British costume dramas of the Tudor era, my personal obsession. So, but then so many people, the movies became influential, but it was really, he was just a guy with a real interest.
I love it because we talk a lot about the 1960s, the end of the 1960s, and the death of the studio system and the Dr. Dolittle of it all. But people forget, too, that the big costume dramas were also the last real remnants of the old Hollywood system, putting A-list actors in ermine and poofy dresses and having them recreate stuff. I mean, that was every big star of the studio era did one of these. Katharine Hepburn played Mary Queen of Scots. Charles Laughton had played Henry VIII before for Corda. That was British, but, you know, it still had crossed the pond. Gene Simmons played young Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth. That movie is not good. You know, all of them have played in this landscape. So it was a real mark of quality to do this. And this movie just did okay at the box office. It did not really blow the lid off anything. And
sorry, I just wanted to mention also the fact that I found this really interesting. I watched the movie and then I read about it afterwards. So I'm just like, here's the fun facts. But the play, it was based on a play, and the play is from 1948, and it was considered unfilmable because it talks about incest. It talks about virginity.
Adultery.
Yeah, like, so they were just like in the like code era. They were just like, it was a really, really popular play, but it took them 20 years to make the movie, which happened to be the same time that this guy was like, hey, let's do all the Tudors. So like it worked out well for him. But I found that interesting that it was from the play to the movie, 20 years.
Exactly. And Maxwell Anderson, you know, again, had also had connections to, was often popularly adapted in the studio era. Most people know Maxwell Anderson for The Bad Seed, which was in the 1950s. Very different play than this. I would love to have seen the original play. I want to say, based on what the original play, the cast, it was originally Joyce Redmond as Anne Boleyn and Rex Harrison, sexy Rexy himself, playing Henry VIII, which we all know I hate Rex Harrison, but I would have liked to have seen his take on the character. But what always throws me is that the play is very much about Anne Boleyn, even though Rex Harrison won a Tony for his performance. The original opening of the play is Anne Boleyn recounting, you know, that she's going to be executed. And then we have Henry in flashback, whereas the first person we see in this movie is Richard Burton's Henry VIII, and then we flash back. I think it takes a good like 10, 15 minutes for Geneviève Bujold to even show up. This is the grand issue with Anne of the Thousand Days. The title, the cover of the movie is usually her with him in the background, and yet, because this is a Richard Burton joint, he's got to be a heavy part of this movie. I always tell people what I find funny about this movie is, you know, this is Richard Burton in the late 60s. This is not Richard Burton in the late 50s, early 60s. These are the Elizabeth years, the Liz Taylor years, but they were a bit removed from the Liz and Dick of it all. You know, Richard Burton hated making this movie. Hated everything about it. I think part of it is he didn't win the Oscar, but, you know, whatever. But he presumably did not like making it. He felt that Geneviève Bujold was a crappy actress. I think he called her pretentious and thought that she thought she was a Duzé, like Eleonora Duzé, and, you know, that he didn't care for her, which, again, I feel like Dick doth protest too much.
I feel like the energy of him not wanting to be there is like palpable in this movie, especially in what I would say the second half, where it's just him pouting in various rooms and Geneviève not being there. That makes so much sense that he didn't want to be there because like, you can tell. The dance scenes, I was like, that's a stand-in. Richard Burton would never do this like, hey, naughty little.
I love his dance moves, which, you know, are very much kind of giving that breakdancing chick in the Olympics. You know, it's like a lot of hand, like elbow work. You get the occasional full body shot where you do wonder if it's him doing the little like
100% not him. They never show his face. Then when his legs are moving, they never show his face.
They patted a guy from the back.
The upper body work is just so hilarious. He wanted Elizabeth Taylor. This was the time when they often were just starring together in movies for various reasons. Some have said that it was they starred together because it was better to have two stars. Others said they did it for tax reasons. Others said that they didn't trust each other, or needed to keep each other on the wagon. But he really wanted Liz Taylor. Hal Wallace said no, because I think Elizabeth Taylor was 37, felt that she was too old for the role. Even though Liz is in the movie. If you watch frame by frame the scene where Irene Pappas is praying and a woman comes in and puts a mask over her face, it's Liz Taylor. You can clearly see her face in one scene, and the boobs are on full display, so that gives it away. But Elizabeth Taylor was there every day because she thought that he was sleeping with Geneviève Bujold, who also was just not interested in him. I was fortunate to interview Geneviève Bujold when the movie.
No.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I called her on the phone. I have her phone number in my phone. It was fantastic. I was so intimidated.
The Queen of Canada, her and Celine. Tied.
Yeah, exactly. She was so sweet, and she had nothing but nice things to say about Richard Burton. She could have easily talked shit about him. She's the only one left at this point. But she had great things to say about working with him. She said that he was a total professional. I don't know if I agree with that, but Burton in this movie is definitely not the young hot Burton you want in Cleopatra. He's 44 looking 57. I'm being kind, 65. He's looking a little long in the tooth. The lighting doesn't really do him justice. He's got the wispy hair. He's in the very confining clothes. And I would also say the script kind of lets him down, because I think what I unintentionally find hilarious about their interactions in this movie is that this is supposed to be this big romance, which, and you and I know, there's a lot of controversy about who was the real love of Henry VIII's life, who was the best wife. And this movie is meant to emphasize something about their relationship, like that they needed each other. I don't think if you had cast Elizabeth Taylor, it would have worked, because it would have been the Liz and Dick show, would have just been watching them snipe at each other. Those sequences where Geneviève and him are arguing, what makes them great is that she's holding her own against this guy who's physically and, socially more powerful than her. And she's just this very fey, pasty little girl with long hair. I
need to say about Geneviève Bujold, Queen of Canada. And I was thinking, how can I say this on the podcast in a way that she is an icon. She's embodying her intensity in this role is so great. But what's part of what makes it so great is she's cute as a button.
Yep.
She is so cute in this movie. When you first see her, I'm like, oh, of course he fell in love with her. She's adorable, but then she's ferocious, and that sort of that tension is part of what's fascinating about her. But he's a bit for Rich, 44, not old. Richard Burton looks 57, but which is also not old. But I'm just saying she's 19 or something, but she holds her own, and she's this tiny little Smurf-sized person, and that's part of what's so impressive and what's so fun about watching her, especially in the first part of the movie where he is trying to seduce her and she's just having none of it. Those scenes are so good.
It totally makes sense though, because the actual king was much older than her, had already been married for something 15 or 20 years to Catherine of Aragon. And he was just so desperate, and also notoriously out of shape, and notoriously did not take good care of himself, and notoriously ate a lot. So it totally makes sense that you have him looming over this tiny little girl. It's actually good casting.
And it makes sense that she's no thanks.
Yeah.
Right? It's of course that you're not winning her over. What about you? Would you first of all, you tore her apart from her true love. Secondly, she's cute and adorable, and you're grandpa. Of course she doesn't want to be with you.
I got this hunky Duke of Northumberland on the line. Let me go.
She shows up in these white diaphanous gowns, that just are so ethereal, and she's laughing and giggly, and it's just every time she is on screen, she is a utter joy to watch. And I'm very upset that she did not win the Oscar that year. We'll talk about what was nominated in 1970, but I wish she had won because she was so good. But what I think I love about her dynamic with Burton is the way the script really emphasizes that she has power, where Cromwell, who's the snarky, maybe queer-coded guy in the corner that's always like, well, acts like the Martin Landau in North by Northwest, that, says at one point, she almost reigns, she entirely rules, which I want like knitted on a sampler or
That's
something.
merch. That's a merch idea.
That's merch. It's so good. But the way that there's a scene where she goes up to the Cardinal Wolsey, who she hates because she believes that he's part of the reason she lost her hunky hot Duke of Northumberland. And she starts talking about how, well, really, I was just, me, young girl, just learning things, was so surprised to discover that, Cardinal Wolsey owns this and he owns this house and he's the most powerful church person. And also he's like the most powerful regular guy. Even more so than the king. Isn't that interesting? Oh my God, I just learned that. And I love the way she plays that, because if you had had somebody like Elizabeth Taylor, regardless of age, I never believe that Elizabeth Taylor is naive. I always feel that she knows what she's doing. And it's that ability Geneviève Bujold has in the movie of conveying naivete, but being in total control of it, that is just so enticing.
Cute as a button as well.
I feel like the script actually did its research in a way of, not a lot of historical films will like info dump on you when you are watching things. They work more in broad strokes, they work more in tropes, they work more in this is the character you think and we're going to tell their story. But this movie is incredibly historically accurate. Like, from the limited things that I know about Anne Boleyn, they make very good mention of the time that she spent in France and learning about sex and having premarital relationships with people, and the fact that she, was incredibly worldly and did actually know lots of things and was educated by her father. They mention her sister in this, who was knocked up by the king.
They often omit her, except for in the other Boleyn girl, which we won't talk about. Yeah. God forbid. But I was happy that Mary Boleyn was mentioned, and the fact that she was his mistress, because often that kind of makes the story a bit messier, but I appreciate they included her for sure.
They even mentioned the two illegitimate children that he sired through her older sister. Like, it's surprisingly historically accurate for a movie that is really just banking on the Richard Burton of it.
No, I was going to say historical accuracy. That is what, again, the part of the movie where it was just like, okay, let's feel how long it was that he was trying to extricate himself from various marriages. That's where I was like, you don't need to be so historically accurate. I appreciate that took a long time, but another scene of Burton being like, oh, I need to end this marriage. Like, that's where, like, I wouldn't have minded, like, a little, like, the movie's a long movie, but also speed it up, or, like, let's throw in some new character. There's the court jester. Like, are you going to say something funny? Like, I wouldn't have minded a bit less historical accuracy in those, like, long talking about, like, church doctrine, trying to find loopholes sequences.
It borrows a lot from biblical epics, I feel, in terms of we need to convey all this deep history from the written word, so yeah, the extended elements of creating the Church of England are boring, to say the least. At least when you watch the Tudors, the TV series, and they're talking about creating the Church of England, like, you get Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Henry Cavill being hot, and some, good clothes and some catty pettiness and all of that. I do want to throw out that, the script, which is credited to Bridget Boland and John Hale, is definitely one of those where I feel like somebody probably should have read some of these lines before they pen them to paper. So we talked about this is really a story of one grown grandpa man's attempt to seduce a young teenage girl. And some of those seduction sequences, and here's the thing that I find funny, Richard Burton is definitely like a swoony dude. I've watched many a movie. Go watch My Cousin Rachel when he was 25 and a baby, and he is like, can make ice melt just by staring at it. It is bananas. But so many of the scenes in this movie where he's attempting to seduce her just are cringe or outright gross. So again, if you watch the trailer, the key scene that they're so excited to show, that Hal Wallace is just so proud to include, is the sequence where they're talking about she wants him to get divorced because if they have children, they would all be bastards, right? And he talks about how he's thinking of her by day and by night. And there is just some line readings and some words where you're just like, I'm sorry, is this seducing or it's just making me cringe? Like, I'm backing away, sir. I am not interested. Like, he talks about we should be playing horse and mare, and I'm like, no, stop giving me animal imagery, my man. I am not interested in this. And the fact that Genevieve is just able to keep a straight face and just be like, yeah, and then it all culminates with him slapping her, which again, this is in the trailer, and how Wallace is like, look at the acting, look at the craft, it's great. And I'm just sitting there like, I feel like you could have shown any other scene from this movie and it would have conveyed the power and the drama more than hearing Richard Burton try to give ladies a panty dropper that is just making me wish I was anywhere else right now. And again, watch this in 6th grade and my teacher heard that and was just kind of like, children, just, it's the olden times, just go with it. Have you joined Ticklish Business Patreon? Well, you should. Just like Allie Moore, Amy Hart, Danny, David Floyd, Donna Hill, Gates, Jacob Howler, Jonathan Watkins, McF, Rachel Clark, and Shawn Goodreau. Listen to episodes 48 hours early, watch exclusive video interviews, receive merch, and even guests on an episode. You also get access to bonus series like Based on a True Podcast, doubled features, and our latest series, But Have You Read the Series? It's all at patreon.com/ticklishbiz.
I do want to shout out what I was impressed about the screenplay. I don't know if you've talked about The Lion in Winter on this podcast.
We have not.
I hate that movie. It is.
It's been a minute since I've seen it. I watched it once and I remember liking it mostly because I was into the petty domestic elements of it, like the backbiting and whatnot. But that's all I remember about it.
It is 7,000 hours long. And it's just people sniping at each other, whatever. The costume, great gowns, lovely gowns. But the thing about that is it was a play, and you can tell it was a play because it's just a series of 4 people sitting in a room together, having witty repartee. Like, it was so obviously a play. I'm like, is this just a filmed play? This movie, I thought, the fact that it was based on a play, like, great job opening it up. I never felt like, oh, this is just like they're outside, they're inside, the scenes are short. Like, there are extended sequences, but it never felt like, oh, you just took a play and filmed it. So credit to all the seduction scenes. I agree. Pretty gross. Genevieve, you just want to be like, oh, run away, Genevieve. But
even the eventual sex scene when they do actually,
I'm like, why are you giving into this, Genevieve?
It's also just filmed so it's an overhead shot of them like post-coital bliss, and it's just dominated by Burton's hairy chest and her sad little head just sitting there. There's a lot of hair going on, and I was just sitting there like, we've maybe picked another angle or something.
The late 60s, they had different aesthetics than we do now. The hairy chest was the height of manliness well through the 80s. Did this do anything for me? No, I'm just saying. Though in 1968, 69, it was a thing. Up and through Magnum PI, it was just the hairy chest everywhere. I don't
want to chest shame anybody. Yes, so
I feel like the Richard Burton of it all, like the fact that he was not enjoying himself, the fact he didn't want to be doing it, the fact, like, I feel like he was like, you know what, I'm going to shoot this once, choose a camera angle. And they're like, oh shit, this is a bad camera angle. He's like, I'm not doing this again. you got the shot. I'm going to go off Liz. Like, let's just go get drunk. Like,
exactly. Well, I think too that you mentioned that the movie does become the Richard Burton show. And I think that is where you can feel like there had to be multiple conversations between Hal Wallace and Burton about how much time he was getting screenplay wise. I'm assuming Burton had to complain about Bujold getting like all the best lines and all the best scenes and whatnot, because there is so much repetition to his Henry VIII. 1 minute he's trying to be like cute and charming, and then she's like, no. And he's just like, okay, but like I can give you this. And she's like, no. And then he's like, well, then he starts blustering and screaming in her face and he walks away. And she's like, but wait, I'm sorry. It's very abusive and toxic, but it also does feel very repetitious. Is he a man baby or is he not? Make a call. And the movie doesn't necessarily want to do that. But I feel like that was crafted just to feel like they were giving him more to do because he knew that the women were clearly better. And that's all the women for the most part. Irene Pappas, who I love that Wiki has a complaint against the accuracy of the time. They were like, well, technically Irene Pappas is too dark skinned to be playing Catherine of Aragon. That's what a typical conception of what a Spaniard looks like, and Spaniards are white. I get that, but it was 69. You should just be lucky that we got anybody of color.
People.
Yeah. Irene Pappas, yes, was a Greek actress. And she just recently passed, I think a year or two ago, which is unfortunate. But she's also very good as Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon is often considered, the long-suffering wife, the one that never wavered in her determination and love for her husband. And here, she's not backing down from any of this. I think what I appreciate is the repetition, the mirroring of her trial scenes with Anne Boleyn's trial scenes to emphasize, like, this dude does this. This is what he does. He gets married and then he tries to find a way to get rid of you. And that's just what's up. Unless you're the third wife and then you just like die good old fashioned infant mortality.
Irene Pappas, I want to say too, like I don't give a shit about historical accuracy, like who looks like who, whatever, in terms of that. But as a physical type, she opposite Genevieve Bujold, I think they're so different facially. It was a really good pairing of people because Genevieve is like soft. She's got like round cheeks. She's got like an upturned nose. Irene Pappas is like so dramatic. Her cheekbones, like she's got this sort of aquiline nose. Like the two of them just play off of each other just visually. Like they look so different.
Yeah. What I think too, what I appreciated was the one scene we get of Mary Boleyn, which is Catherine of Aragon's daughter with Henry VIII. Weirdly enough, she looks
Mary Tudor.
Mary Tudor. Excuse me. She looks like Liz Taylor, which is really weird. She's got like really black hair, really white features.
Famous red-haired person. Yeah.
Exactly. There's the ginger erasure in this movie.
Notoriously tall and ginger.
Exactly. Which I know that they really wanted, Hal Wallace wanted Olivia Hussey to play Anne Boleyn. That was his first choice. And that was because he had worked with her on Romeo and Juliet. And she was just 18 playing this character. And she talks about in her autobiography that, she kind of like feigned interest, but not really. And she essentially talked herself out of the role. And I don't really think she lost out on anything because I don't think she would have been good. Because again, it's a really fine needle to thread in having a character that feels like they're in control at a young age, and having Olivia Hussey, who was a very young age, just 18, I would have felt like that was a little girl being taken advantage of.
I only know her from Romeo and Juliet, but I don't feel like she had, like, Genevieve Bujold is like, there's a reason she's everybody's favorite Anne Boleyn, because she has this intensity that I think is very specific to just her. Olivia Hussey would have been more of an ingenue, I would think, in the role where you need like this Genevieve French Canadian energy.
You can't have her look utterly powerless, like you were just saying, but you also cannot have her appear to be too powerful because she wasn't. Like, you can't have someone actually going toe to toe with the King of England, especially because we all know the story and know her head's going to get chipped off by the end of the movie. Like, you can't have her actually look like she has any sort of control over Henry VIII, because that would just be complete misrepresentation of the story.
Yeah, like you have to have like this balance of Genevieve, like miraculously, like I don't know anyone else who could have done this, but she also seems like she's interesting enough and smart enough that you see why Henry is like intrigued by her. She's not just pretty, like she's interesting. And the fact that she fights back, like he finds that intriguing, but she can't fight back too much. Like, it's such a balance. And she, especially in the first part of the movie, the good part of the movie, she strikes the balance so well where you see why he's so enraptured by her, because we are too, as the audience. But without her seeming like, you can't be like an asshole to him, but she knows just how far to push it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think too, what people appreciate about her performance as Anne Boleyn and why it's commonly considered one of the best, if not the best, next to Natalie Dormer, is that she is a second wave feminism type of Anne Boleyn. I have not seen The Private Lives of Henry VIII. I keep saying I'm going to because I'm completist with the Tudor adaptations, but Merle Oberon played Anne Boleyn in that film. And I know that Susan Bordeaux talked in her book about the fact that Merle Oberon was it's the 1930s. She's very wily and like exciting and kind of sneaky, much like a 1930s pre-code actress would. But Genevieve's performance as Anne Boleyn here, leading into second wave feminism, she's not a girl boss, but she is very much a woman that knows what she wants, knows what she has to do to get it. Even going so far as to tell Henry VIII he needs to kill his best friend, Sir Thomas More, in order to get the active succession passed, which is the one I get why it's included. And I usually don't complain about historical accuracy when it's something I appreciate, but it's the one thing where I'm like, that's not true. Thomas More, no, Anne had nothing to do with that historically. But you have to emphasize that she has equal power to Henry VIII in some way. But she is very much this strong, confident, I don't need a husband type of thing. Even when he offers her the opportunity at the end when she's imprisoned in the Tower of London to like, well, you could just go on holiday, take Elizabeth with you, and I'll fund your lifestyle. She's just like, no. You promised this to me, and now you're saying you don't want to do it anymore. I do wonder, because I know it would be another couple of years, I think, before no-fault divorce would become a thing. But with a lot of marriages starting to crumble in the wave of second-wave feminism and women realizing that they did want to get divorced, it's fascinating that her whole thing is like, I am the wife. Sir, I've put in my time. I'm getting what's mine. And I think people really respond to that. She feels modern by 1969 standards. She still feels modern, I think, by 2024 standard, which is why she is the best Anne Boleyn. I will not be taking questions at this time about that.
She brings, and this is where I, like, again, I was looking at the Susan Bordeaux book today as well, just to refresh my memory about how was Anne Boleyn seen in this time before this movie? Like, was this movie sort of reasserting what people already thought or not? And so what the book reminded me of was the fact that she had been alternately like, oh, this poor tragic victim who never did anything wrong, and she's kind of like a saintly martyr, or she's this like conniving evil witch. And so this film does present a third thing. I think it goes a bit hard. Not, I don't mean to be like negatively critical, but it's very much just like she also was clearly innocent of all the things she was accused of. And Anne Boleyn actually was. But this movie, like when they come to arrest her, she's like, what? Arrest me? Like it was a bit like, Anne, like,
Yeah. She wasn't like completely immune to gossip and not knowing what was happening in her court at that time.
They made her a bit too naive in that sequence, I felt.
Yeah, and I think what's also interesting is because this is co-written by a woman, but it's hard to divorce the Richard Burton of it all. And again, I can see where had you cast Liz Taylor, the sequences would have given off a totally different air. But, I always have to smile at the end when she's giving this big speech at the end of the movie to the last time she sees Henry VIII, and she talks about like, yeah, why don't you look at every one of the dudes you've ever had in your court and see if I didn't think they were better in bed than you were? And I'm just like, I get the energy, love the enthusiasm, but do we have to? Like, and that's, I think, the big struggle of the Hal Wallace model of historical films is that the goal is to give you the prestige and the authenticity and the history. And Romeo and Juliet, of course, was accused of this later, and of course there's still that lawsuit that's going on between Olivia Hussey and Leonard Whiting. But there's also this air of prurience kind of that underlies a lot of those narratives, whether that's nudity or stuff like this, where it's just like these petty low blows, which again, I love them, but I do often think it leads people to question what Wallace's intent is with a lot of these costume dramas.
Yeah. She was so painted for so long and such long swaths of time as just the wily slut of England that I think it's actually like it's definitely salacious in that, you know, we do have like the whispers of incest. They keep the subplot that really no one ever talks about of like the rumors that she's sleeping with her brother and stuff like that. And that's so low on the list of accusations that were thrown against Anne Boleyn at that time, where she was already having her way with countless other like advisors and things like that. So I feel like he definitely slipped in the salaciousness, but the fact is that her big giant speech at the end is about motherhood, that I think that has an air of purifying the accusations against her, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think what most people walk away from this movie is the third act, and that's where Genevieve Bujold really gets the Oscar moments, whether that's the one element of blank verse that they kept from the original Maxwell Anderson play, where she's doing the counting, you know, with the actual 1,000 days of the title. And I love how Bujold plays that sequence, because there is such love. She goes through all the emotions, right? With like every one of the little sticks she's got. You know, one of them is pride, the other one is anger, you know, regret that she ended up exactly like she knew. Like there is this air of, I'm celebrating all these things that I have. I have my child, but at the same time, like I knew this was what was going to happen. I knew it. And at the end, you know, when she gives him the big speech and she talks about how, you know, it's usually something I hate. And Emily, you know that I've talked about this when we talk about based on true stories, where I'm like, I hate when they talk about, like, they act like they know the future, you know, like I usually hate that. I give this movie a pass because of how Bujold gives the speech about how Elizabeth, her child, will be queen and her blood will be well spent. I love it because it is such the ultimate FU. You know, like it's just like, this is what's gonna happen. I also have to shout out the sequence when she sends Jane Seymour away, and it's just the camera on Genevieve Bujold, and he's like, "Where'd you send her?" And she's like, "I sent her as far as I could because we don't own Scotland." I love that. Again, I need that knitted on a sampler. I need to make merch with that. I love it so much. But those are the Oscar scenes, and I'm sure that chapped Burton's ass that, you know, he didn't really have any of those scenes, you know.
I agree with you 100% about the end. I often also don't like when characters pretend to know the future or are shown to. But in this, because the story is so sad, because of the way that Anne Boleyn dies, and watching it, I'm just like, oh, maybe it'll work out this time. No, it doesn't. So it was like reassuring to me that she was just like, fuck you, Elizabeth is gonna be the queen. Like, I'm gonna live on forever. Everyone's gonna love me or whatever. I'm just like, yeah, like it was the movie's way of like giving a bit of a happy ending. And then that cute little toddler Elizabeth just like walking in her giant skirt just all the way across. I was like, that's so cute. It was I found that very moving. It was very cute and
it's
very
a
moving.
very bittersweet sequence because people don't often, they see that Queen Elizabeth becomes queen. Yeah, most people know that, but people don't really understand. And if you're a nerd like me and you've read a lot of Queen Elizabeth I biographies, you know, she really struggles with losing her mom at a very young age and her mother being labeled a heretic and whore and all these things. You know, she really dealt with having to being told that she was of that ilk. Father disinherited her, and then he put her back in the succession, then he would take her out. So there was a lot of back and forth. And then that's before you get into the whole like Thomas Seymour of it all. Like, was she molested? Was she not? It becomes she I think has an even more tragic backstory in those early years than her mom. So it is a rallying cry at the end that she is the last image we see in the movie, but that really does benefit people not knowing, like they did in 1969, what would happen after, you know, the reign of Bloody Mary Tudor and the death of Edward and all of that. It's just it gets even messier, which I'm very sad that Tudor spinoff about the kids didn't become a thing because a lot more stuff happened after.
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that this movie actually does really well, which is one of the reasons why the ending really hit very hard for me, was that it does not make any bones about the fact that Thomas Boleyn, who is Anne and Mary's father, was absolutely using his daughters as sex pawns in his get rich quick scheme and had absolutely no compunction about selling them off to this king or whomever was the highest bidder and absolutely abusing the crap out of his daughters. And so for Anne to acknowledge that, which she does, where she's just like, I want nothing to do with this. You can't do this to me. And then he does. For her to really go to town, standing up for her daughter at the end and saying she's going to be better than a king. She is going to be powerful. She is going to prove you wrong. I think is a really lovely thread to connect to. I think it's ham-fisted for both the time and for the setting, absolutely, but in 2024 I'm digging it. I love it. I'm so happy that's like the end speech that she gives.
Exactly. I want to throw out the Oscars really briefly. So this movie was nominated for several Oscars. Only won for the costumes, but it was nominated for Best Picture, for Burton, for Genevieve, for Anthony Quayle, who was Cardinal Wolsey, writing, cinematography, art direction, all of the things that you would expect a costume drama to be nominated in. In case people want to know who was nominated for lead actor alongside Richard Burton, it was Peter O'Toole for Goodbye Mr. Chips, Jon Voight for Midnight Cowboy, and Dustin Hoffman for Midnight Cowboy, and John Wayne for True Grit. So you're seeing that old and new guard, that
Wow.
divergent in.
I can't that when you said I'm just like, what? Like Midnight Cowboy is the same time as this? But
Yeah.
that feels like 10 years later. Dustin Hoffman was
Exactly.
alive. This movie feels so oldie-timey. Yeah.
Does anybody want to guess who won?
John Wayne.
Go.
You're right. It was John Wayne.
It was John Wayne.
It was John Wayne for True Grit, which many people argue that was a career Oscar. True, some people have said True Grit's not his best film. He should have gotten one earlier. This was more like, we have to give you an Oscar at this point because you might
You're getting too old.
You're getting too old. Best actress in a leading role alongside Genevieve was Jane Fonda for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Gene Simmons for The Happy Ending, Maggie Smith for The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, and Liza Minnelli for The Sterile Cuckoo. Does anybody want to take a stab at who walked away with that Oscar?
I'm going to say Jane Fonda just because I'm pretty sure she has won an Oscar. Maybe it was for this.
It was not for this.
Okay.
Maggie Smith?
It was Maggie Smith for The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. Yeah. And somebody can message us and say that The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is great, but I'm not going to, I don't care. I'm going to say that Genevieve got robbed. Maggie, you know where you can meet me. We can talk about this.
I think in terms of just like history, like of those films and performances, like the only one that anyone talks about anymore is Genevieve in this movie.
I would agree. Yeah, it's definitely hard for me to find anybody that talks about The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. In case you want to really bring it home, Best Picture nominees for this year, alongside Anne of the Thousand Days, included Hello Dolly, the infamous Hello Dolly, Z, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and Midnight Cowboy. Does anybody know who won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1970?
Z! I don't know. That's the only one I remember.
It was Midnight Cowboy.
Was it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yep. That was an Oscar year.
Like saying these films and just trying to picture this movie alongside them, I kind of see where this movie would feel old-fashioned to an audience that is like Midnight Cowboy. Like, I mean, Hello Dolly also is just kind of the old and the new. Like, it's so much. I could see that this movie 10 years before maybe would have been really, really successful in the box office. But in that climate of like Woodstock and whatever, like people want something new, something less mannered or something.
Yeah, I can tell you, Hal Wallace was nominated multiple times for an Academy Award. This was the last Academy Award nomination he would ever get in his career. He only ever won one Oscar in his career, and that was for Casablanca. He was nominated for a lot of classic films: I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, Captain Blood, Robin Hood, My Beloved Four Daughters, Jezebel, Maltese Falcon, Yankee Doodle Dandy. Yeah, he had been nominated for Beckett as well, and that got bested by My Fair Lady. Controversial choice there. Hal Wallace, some might say, very underrated, did not get his flowers, but this was the last time we would see him at the Academy Awards. Overall, I mean, yeah, I'm a soft touch. I love this movie. I love the Tudors. I've watched many a Tudor spin-off movie, and I will usually complain about something. Like, if you ever see me on the street, ask me about my opinions on the whole, like, Charles Brandon, Mary Tudor, the sister, not the daughter, of it all.
On the Tudors?
Just in anything. There's a couple movies that they've done with like Marion Davies did one. The name escapes me. If Laura Gabrielle was here, she would tell me. When Knighthood Was in Flower, I think is what it's called. But it's a silent version of the Charles and Mary story that is very interesting. And some movies really do kind of play with that narrative in some weird and interesting ways. But yeah, I hope I've given you something else to seek out.
No, you
So
have, because the only portrayal I was familiar of with her was the maddening portrayal on the Tudors, where they combined Henry VIII's sisters, Mary and Margaret, into one person,
yeah,
who's called Margaret, but she has the life of Mary.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think they did another version. I keep wanting to say with Gene Simmons. She just keeps popping up like a bad penny in these movies. But I love this movie. I love it so much, and it's all for the Genevieve. Richard Burton's just there. You could have made this movie like The Women and just had a lot of people like obliquely reference the king, and I'd have been completely fine. And I say that as somebody that loves Richard Burton. I love seeing him. This is not his best work, but I think it's just a really great example of how old Hollywood costume drama could be done in the late 60s. It was a dying genre alongside the musical. I think it's funny that this and Hello Dolly, which was considered the death of the musical, were nominated for Best Picture the same year. I love it. I love it. I'm glad we finally got to talk about it. I'm glad that nobody hated it. But yeah, and final thoughts on Anne of the Thousand Days and the Tudors.
What I would say is, if someone, and maybe this exists on YouTube somewhere, made a cut of this movie where every scene has Genevieve in it, and you cut out all the scenes with no Genevieve, that would be my favorite movie. If you could just take out any of the non-Genevieve scenes, like anytime she's there, it's the same as the Tudors, the TV show. As soon as Dudley Dormer is killed off, I'm just like, oh, I have no interest in the show anymore, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm happy to have seen this film. I don't know why I've never seen it before, given my interest in old classic Hollywood movies and the Tudors. But yeah, I think the Tudors they're gonna keep showing up. And I think this aged, like it felt old-fashioned then, but I think this like aged okay compared to many other costume dramas. And part of that is Genevieve's feels so vivid and so contemporary.
I would say though, as much as I love this movie, the final death scene of Anne Boleyn will always go to Natalie Dormer in the season 2 finale of The Tudors. That is one of the best character demises. Like, it's an all-day event. Like, watching they like go back and forth and kind of like break it down by hour. You get to see her go through all the stages of grief. It's a great episode of television. So just have to shout that out. Emily, final thoughts on the movie, The Tudors in general?
I really enjoyed it. I find the Tudors just so delightfully trashy and weird. And, it really helps to remind you that these people were people because of how messy and awkward and conniving and rude and terrible they were to one another. And it helps to remind you of just how obsessive they were with fictions of nobility and things like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we love the Tudor stories so much, because they help us see power hungry people. Now that there's distance, we can see the power hunger a lot better. And I think also we connect so much with, frankly, women getting thrown under the bus so much that it's why we are drawn to people like Anne Boleyn and Catherine of Aragon, who I always call Catherine of Aragorn in my head, which is a really bad tick that I have. The other wives should get more attention than they do. They were victims just as much as the first two more salacious, sexy wives. I really appreciate the fact that they included Jane Seymour in this, and just how mad Anne was that she was like, I'm 19 and I'm already over the hill and you're already onto someone else. And like, holy crap, everything I feared is coming to a head. And I just think that they included details of Anne Boleyn and the politics surrounding her that often get glossed over in the more fun, let's be honest, narrative of like, oh, she's the wily slut coming to take over the king. And it's just like, no, there were other details that this movie included that I feel like more future, the inevitable future representations of the Tudors should remember to include. So it was really cool.
I would definitely say go read Susan Bordeaux's book after this. And anytime Hollywood wants to finally greenlight my Catherine Howard biopic, I would love to see that, because Cat Howard, another maligned Tudor woman that needs to be culturally
Catherine
reevaluated.
Howard is my girl. I will ride for Catherine Howard. I'm excited that there's Firebrand, so Catherine Parr has a movie. So like let's get an Anne of Cleves movie. Let's get a Catherine Howard. Like Jane Seymour doesn't need a movie. She was very boring. But and she's in Wolf Hall. She's fun.
Let's keep finding small queens, short queens for these, because Alicia Vikander, very tiny, little Catherine Parr, just start getting all the short girls.
Kate, what's her name? Kaylee Spaney.
Spaney, yeah, exactly. She could definitely play a Tudor woman.
There's a rope from like Priscilla Presley to Catherine Howard. Like I think there's parallels.
Yeah, exactly. Hollywood agents, call us. We're available.
Yeah, please.
And oh my gosh, I'm so happy we finally got to talk about this movie. We got you on.
Mm-hmm.
If you aren't already listening to Vulgar History, then you should, because it is awesome. And Anne always tells me about cool women that I don't know about. But feel free to tell listeners where they can find you online, anything you have upcoming that they should be on the lookout for.
For sure. So my podcast is called Vulgar History. It's a feminist women's history comedy podcast. I have talked about the Tudors, I will say, in a non-ashamed way that I bring them out sometimes because that gets more listeners to listen. And then once I've got them hooked, then I talk about someone much less famous. But I also have a Substack, which is Vulgar History on Substack. And actually, when you're listening to this, I will have just returned from a trip to the UK, where I'm going to be visiting numerous Anne Boleyn related things. So if you want to see my like vlogs and my like travel photos, I'm posting those all on Instagram, which is Vulgar History Pod. So you can see all the things that I'm seeing.
I will definitely be watching that as somebody that has Googled Anne Boleyn's tomb and wheelchair access, and the answer is there is none. So
no,
broke my heart. They also said the Tower of London, the only thing that is wheelchair friendly is the crown jewels. You want to see anything else, too bad for you. So yeah, kind of shattered my European dreams right there.
Boo.
So
Yeah.
That's going to close out this edition of Ticklish Business. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Reviews matter, and we love to see them. So leave us one on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or again, the podcast app of your choice. If you do leave them on a different podcast app, please send them our way and we will read them on the show. You can follow the podcast on Twitter/X, I'm begrudgingly calling it that, at ticklish_biz, as well as on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. I am trying to get better at learning the Threads game. We are at Ticklish Biz on all of those. You can always follow me at my Substack, which is kristenlopez.substack.com, as well as my official website, kristenklopez.com, and on all social at kristenlopez88. Emily, what do you got coming soon, and where can we find you on the interwebs?
Oh, golly, nothing's in the pipeline, because that is the life of an author, where it's like 12 months of nothing and then maybe 1 week of something. So I'm still in a nothing mode, unfortunately, but you could go back and read the old books. That would be swell, especially if you really like mid-century stuff. And you can learn all about those things at MsEmilyEdwards.com.
And the Patreon keeps the lights on to Ticklish Biz HQ and gives us chances to do new things, like that Don Johnson July, as well as the rest of the remaining bonus content we have planned for the rest of the year. So consider becoming a subscriber at just $1 and show your support at patreon.com/ticklishbiz. We also thank everybody for bearing with us as we decided to cut some episodes and completely change our release date structure so that we could accommodate the fact that we have made some life choices that have caused us to be incredibly stressed out. So if you've wondered why the show is now on an alternate spate of weeks, that's why. We will be back on September 18th, celebrating the release of the new Christopher Reeve documentary and talking about 1978's Superman. So come back soon. We'll talk then.